Welcome to Season 8 of the FarrCast, bringing you insights into Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It is the 23rd day of January, 2025. 23rd day of January. Here we go, coming to the end of the first month of 2025. We have a sort of new president of the United States with lots of policies coming through. We're going to talk to Mahaffee when we come up and see what he thinks about what's going on. 1,500 people pardoned. We have troops heading to the U.S. border. President Trump fulfilling and acting on many of his campaign promises. He has a remarkably high approval rating, over 50%. Congress is in step. Everybody is in line. Everybody's singing from the same hymnal. Well, you might hear from me in segment 2 with Mahaffee that I'm not singing so loudly over these 1,500 pardons. Though Mahaffee did tell me when I spoke with him about it that Washington has become a much more polite place. About every other person you talk to says, "Pardon me." There you go. There's the Mahaffee joke, folks. "Pardon me" in Washington is the new catchphrase. And why not? Everybody else seems to be getting one. Why not you? Okay, markets still near all-time highs have had a rally back. The Magnificent Seven doing very well. Bonds got a lot weaker, and now they've gotten stronger. The dollar pulled back a little, but overall it's very strong, very strong. CEO of Procter & Gamble on CNBC, in responding to Jamie Dimon's comment that a stronger dollar meant that the U.S. economy was getting stronger and was in general a good thing, CEO of Procter & Gamble said, "That's easy for Jamie to say. He's not selling products around the world. He doesn't have to convert his earnings back into dollars that are a lot stronger and make him look bad." So there's a bit of a debate out there on that. Prices are still high. What are expectations for 2025? And how long will the Trump honeymoon last? When we want to find out about markets, we talk to our friend Lebenthal. You know this, folks. Listen to Lebenthal on the FarrCast, and has been with us now into season 8 seasons of the FarrCast. Okay. Cerity Partners, CNBC contributor, a United States Navy veteran. So we listen to Lebenthal. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Michael. Has it really been 8 seasons? Time flies when you're
believe that?
Time flies when you're having fun, my friend.
Oh, baby. And thanks to our thousands of listeners. We picked up thousands of listeners again last year, right at the end of the year. Not sure why the surge, but thank you very much, folks. And please share us on your social media. I know you're here to listen to Lebenthal, so I'll shut up. Jim, what do you think about my intro today? And what are you thinking about 2025? What's changed since we have this new president?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is everything, right? Everything coming out of Washington, D.C. is change. Doesn't matter whether it's return to office for federal workers, gender and inclusivity changes, drilling for oil is going to pick up, all sorts of regulatory lightning is going to go on. So from Washington, D.C., just about everything is changing. Now, for people like me and you and our listeners who are in the markets, I'm not so sure so much has changed just yet. I heard you say in your intro that there was this perhaps halo effect in the markets from what President Trump has announced. The markets are certainly strong. And you look at, announcements like the Stargate announcement, which propelled the NASDAQ higher recently. I think to myself, maybe this is a strength in the market that's more reflective of a very strong economy, good profit growth, inflation that is still coming down, albeit much slower than we would like, and a Federal Reserve that is still intent on cutting interest rates. In other words, there is a pretty strong backdrop upon which the presidential executive orders are being announced. And it may be that backdrop that is propelling the markets higher. Just before I toss this back to you, I have this feeling that however many executive orders have been issued, 200, that, some of them obviously are going to get hung up in the courts. Some of them are more wishful thinking. Some of them will get done. And some of them, those ones that do get done, are likely to be stimulative for the economy and for the stock markets. But let's just not expect that all of these pronouncements are going to come to pass. That is highly unlikely. There's a little bit of, actually, there's a lot of throwing spaghetti at a wall here to see what sticks.
Well, and the president uses bombast and shock and awe in his early pronouncements rather effectively. This is not my style, as I'm sure all of our long-term listeners know. It's not Lebenthal's style either, this shock and awe approach to things. But much of this has been very effective for President Trump, and you end up somewhere less than your initial posturing position, negotiating position. So we'll have to see. Jim, if we look at the numbers and we say, okay, perhaps we can get to somewhere around that 2% GDP growth. We had Dr. Jay Bryson on last week, chief economist at Wells Fargo. He thinks 2% GDP growth this year, and it's really going to tail off coming into the end of the year. He thinks the effects of tariffs and other things will be a real headwind for markets and for earnings and for the economy. But so how much can you get out of stocks in a 2% GDP year? How much can earnings grow when you're already at 22 times earnings to start the year?
You can still get growth. And the key elements to think about here are productivity and margin expansion. And that's, frankly, the markets are counting on both of those things happening, productivity being enhanced by artificial intelligence, and margin improvement having a lot to do with cost pressures on the input side of corporate profits going down. Now, when we talk about the numbers, I think it's important to point out where we are. We're in the very beginning of the fourth quarter 2024 earnings reporting season. And there's a phenomenon happening so far that is rare. It's not unheard of. But the phenomenon is where the overall analyst estimates for corporate profitability in the fourth quarter are going up. We've reported just less than 15% of S&P 500 companies so far, and the analyst estimates for the S&P 500 in the fourth quarter are up about 0.7%. Not a lot, I know that, 0.7% since the beginning of the quarter. The reason this is worth pointing out is twofold. One, normally over the last few years, what has happened is the early results come in, the estimates go down, and then technology and Mag 7 rides to the rescue with gargantuan profit growth, and the overall quarter looks better than we expected. What you're seeing so far is really strong results from financials. And we know financials are the heart of the economy, right? They're the ones that pump money throughout the system upon which the rest of the economy grows. So the fact that you're getting a better than expected earnings season right out of the gate bodes well for the second point, which is this. Based on productivity and margin expansion, we are expecting around 14% year-over-year growth in S&P 500 earnings this year, 2025 over 2024. Make no mistake, that is a heavy lift. All right. That 14% is a big number. However, that estimate.
You believe that? You believe 14%?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, go back to what you just started talking about, Michael, that if GDP is going to grow 2%, and that's actually, I think it'll grow higher than that, but let me come back to that. That's a rough proxy for where top line, actually add inflation to that. So say, nominal GDP is going to be 4.5%, 5%. That's a rough proxy for where top line growth is going to be. How are you going to get that other 14%? Through margin expansion, which I've got to be honest, we're at record margins right now. So we're really counting on more margin expansion. It is a heavy lift, but it's a good sign that we're off to a good start in the fourth quarter earnings season.
Do you think productivity and AI can be sufficient to keep a lid on wage growth? Wage growth and wage inflation has been a huge pressure on margins, right, on S&P 500 margins. And how do you make sure that you don't have to have a big hiring surge? Well, you have the machines and the computers and everything else produce instead of people. And you see that when you check out at the supermarket or Home Depot or anywhere else, or into the airlines. God help you if you have to check into an airline and get your bags checked. Woo! Get there early, folks. But machines don't do that as well. And they never smile at you, which kind of bums me out too. So, but there's productivity coming there. Can it be enough to offset? Can you still have the growth, 14% from where we've come? And after two 20% years in the markets, I'd be thrilled for a 10% year this year, but you're making me feel like you think we're going to get more than that again.
Well, let me first make the distinction between profit growth, 14%, and I'm not so sure you're going to get 10% on the S&P 500 based on where the multiples are, which you alluded to so far, meaning that the stock market may, at the end of 2024, have priced in some lofty expectations to begin with. You know, by the way, I'm going to veer tangentially here for a second, Michael. You know me very well, and you know that I believe that just saying the market multiple is 22 is a bit of a canard. There are plenty of sectors. You like that?
I just like it when you use words like canard. I really do.
I like canard. I know.
It's a great word.
I could have said feint. That's another good word. Decoy is too plain. All right. I'm using canard. Canard,
No
folks,
question.
means decoy. But look under the hood of the market. Okay. Financials, industrials, health care. I mean, I'm kind of shouting this from the mountaintops here. We've gotten through the election year, which is horrible, always horrible on healthcare stocks. This is where you're supposed to look. The valuations, the dividends, they're marvelous. Now, I know I'm going tangential, and now I've got a little rasp in my throat. Let's see if I can work through that. But when you come back to productivity, I think it's important to note that it is not a slam dunk that artificial intelligence will promote productivity. Let me rephrase that. It's not a slam dunk that artificial intelligence will promote productivity in 2025. By 2030, we're going to have a hell of a lot of productivity. So there's a reasonable question, and it will be answered in part this year, as to what the pace of productivity enhancement will be. But take some comfort, folks, that productivity for the last several quarters has been trending higher, and it looks like that is likely to happen. That will offset the wage inflation that you're talking about, which I'll close, Michael, by saying at the last labor report, average hourly earnings were up 3.9% year over year. That is getting closer to the 3% that the Fed wants it to. So it's not as bad as it was.
Come back to me now with strategy, because we're out of time, and I want to leave Fred and Ethel with a clear kind of Lebenthal path forward here.
Well, look, that's why you have investment advisors, and everybody chooses their own strategy, right? If you want to be passive, you can just buy the XLV. I believe I got the ticker right, which is the healthcare sector ETF, or you can come
which
to
is not a recommendation to buy or sell any security, ladies and gentlemen. That's an example of an ETF that covers healthcare. That's all it is.
Geez, Michael, I mean, I didn't put an actual stock out there. I mean, I know how the game works here. What I was going to say, if you'd keep your mouth shut for a second, is if you want individual healthcare stocks, call Michael or me. We'll talk to you about them. Look, healthcare, there are companies that have robust pipelines. There are companies that don't have robust pipelines, and there's a lot more to healthcare than just pharmaceuticals. There's obviously health insurers, there's drug distributors, there's hospitals. Look, the whole sector has gotten clobbered, as it always does in an election year. I think that's someplace to look, but let's not lose the big picture here. You are supposed to stay invested for the long run. I don't care if we've had 225% gains in a row on the S&P 500. The economy is strong. This presidential administration wants to continue to have a strong economy and a strong stock market. If you're getting nervous, go to passive ETFs. If you're getting nervous, you can go to cheaper ETFs like the equal weight S&P 500 instead of the market cap. But to look at valuations or the fact that we've had 2 big years and say, I'm out, and I know Michael agrees with me on this, it's a fool's errand. It's market timing. You may get the exit right, but God help you getting the entry right. Nobody does. The re-entry, that is.
Markets go up and markets go down, and long-term investors enjoy and endure both. They enjoy and they endure both. There are periods ahead which we're going to have to endure, folks. So, as always, listen to Lebenthal. Jim Lebenthal is a partner at Cerity Partners, our great friend. Hey, Lebenthal, when you come back and we talk about the other insurance companies and what California means, we've got a lot to get through with you. We need you, Jim. This is a special FarrCast today. Not only is Mahaffee coming up to explain to us what's going on in Washington, our great friend, Jimmy, I'm so excited. Tyler Mathison's going to join us on the FarrCast for the very first time. Jim Lebenthal, you're the best. Thank you. We're coming back with Mahaffee. Please stay with us.
Thanks for being with us this week. Now it's time to go to our political analyst, Dan Mahaffee, and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back. Joining me now, as he does each week, Dan Mahaffee, with, ladies and gentlemen, a new title. He's been promoted. Hey, Wheezy, he's moving on up. That's what he's doing. Now, the president and CEO of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, in addition to being the Eisenhower Fellow for the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, a Washington, D.C. think tank, and above all, senior political analyst on the FarrCast in Season 8. Welcome back, Dan, and congratulations.
Thank you. Good morning, Michael. Good to be talking with you again, as always.
We have been reading about you in newspapers and headlines, listening about you on CNN and on Fox. Oh, wait a minute. Your ascendancy to the presidency apparently has coincided with what was that other one? Oh, yes. President Donald J. Trump, 47th president of the United States, has happened this week. Markets are responding favorably. We have new executive orders that are far-ranging and sweeping. We have President Biden and Mrs. Biden have returned or are returning to their home in Delaware shortly. And it's a new day in Washington, and everybody's very excited in Washington. And CEOs filled the dais during his inauguration. It's a new day in Washington, and there's a lot of optimism. And it's very strange, as I talk to friends and clients, how many are truly elated and how many feel truly dejected and desperate about this. You either love him or you hate him, but a lot of people love him. What do you think about the inauguration, and what do you think we should be paying attention to with these new executive orders and Congress's reaction, media's reaction? And what did it mean to have all of those CEOs there, Dan?
Yes, look, let's go first with the inauguration, and we can, of course, discuss the logistics of why it was moved inside. And we talked about that last week with the weather, and did, in fact, see it moved inside. But you saw the stagecraft and the imagery, if you watch the whole thing on mute, as it were, that the imagery of courtiers, or almost the bending of knee, was what you had, or you almost harken back and look at the footage. If you pull it up on YouTube or a news archive, look at Putin being elected in the Kremlin, where all the golden glittering of Russian society are standing there at attention as they go in. I bring that not to rehash the old Russiagate tropes, but to simply outline that it's a imagery and stagecraft that you haven't seen in inaugurations, I think, in any of our living histories, as we're used to them being a far more open and celebratory type affair. Secondly, I don't think...
when I hear you say that, I hear a note of admiration in your voice, like it was over the top, but it was really well done. Is that your implication?
I would say yes. I'd argue that, look, the content of the speech certainly reflects what he'd been saying during the campaign. Anyone who kept saying that there's going to be unity or turn a leaf, in that sense, I would argue just listen to what he's been saying. He's been very straightforward about it. But the stagecraft, the pomp and ceremony of it, I think, was done in a way that really reflected, at least, if we're looking at this sort of a high point of his power, or at least the start of a plateau, depending on how he handles these next 100 or so days.
So give us your read, Dan. We saw a lot of executive orders, including the release of 1,500 January 6th hostages, January 6th hostages, those people who were arrested, those people who went through the judicial system, and judiciary being the third branch of government, of course, in equal standing. By the way, according to the Constitution, three branches of government all in equal standing with the executive branch. the legislative branch and the judiciary. They went through the judiciary process. 1,500 people. 1,500 people were arrested. 1,500 people had lawyers. Most, I would think they all did, if not their own, but appointed for them. And they've been sentenced. And somehow that was all overturned. Even the person who hit the Capitol Police officer in the side of the head with a fire extinguisher was just exercising their constitutional rights. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not being partisan, but this bothers me to my core. I've got to tell you this. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody's politics, but I'm not being political. I'm telling you, I know what I saw. I watched it in Washington, and I watched the violence. And that this is okay seems to me that if you're in the future, if you're on the president's side, you can do any damn thing you want, and you can break laws. Laws were broken at the Capitol that day. You can break laws, and all will be forgiven as long as you're on my team. Dan, am I being unfair?
No, in the past week, we've seen two presidents of two parties establish the precedent for just that. That if you are a presidential family member, a presidential crony, or even a one person who goes out, or multiple or thousands of people who go out and do violence in the name of a political cause, that you will be somehow protected or pardoned from that. That is a disturbing future going forward that now both of these presidents have set up. I would argue
in many ways, Joe Biden there fired the first shot.
Yeah, with his son, with his family members. I would separate out
and the January 6th Commission and Liz Cheney and others. And I thought the argument was a bit ironic. If they weren't guilty of a crime, why did they have to be forgiven?
I would also argue that all the congressional proceedings would have been protected by the speech and debate clause of the Constitution. But Biden and his legal advisors felt they needed to be more forceful. But both have put together this precedent, and arguably with the pardons.
Hang on to my point. I just want to make sure that my point's clear there. Just before President Trump signed the pardon for the 1,500 hostages probably don't need to be pardoned, in Farr's opinion. He said, why did he have to pardon these people if they hadn't committed a crime? And then he immediately pardoned. You catch me?
I certainly get. I get all of that, and I get there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around on this very specific topic. But if you'll pardon me, I would.
And why wouldn't I pardon you? Hell, everybody else is getting pardoned. Pardons are cheap now. Go ahead. Yes, you're pardoned. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would get to the political aspect of this and say, look, the January 6th issue was something that motivated a subset of the Trump base, but one that arguably he took a rip the Band-Aid off approach to this. We'd seen telegraphed by J.D. Vance and others that this was going to be a more deliberative process. And I think the problem with that, and as we hear from rumors coming from the White House itself, that they said, look, we're going to be relitigating January 6th if we're going through this case by case. We're going to be dealing with all the politics of this constantly. Let's just do it now, do them all, do it quickly, and see if we're talking about this in 2 weeks. And let's ask ourselves, will we be talking about this or something else in 2 weeks? Because that is part, and we know it from the first term, part of the strategy has always been to keep throwing stuff out there and keep the churn and the story moving so that you're not focused on one issue, one policy, one scandal at a time, and ultimately keeps with this media a 49 country pretty divided and churning against itself.
Strategically, you're suggesting that this was probably the right move. If you were going to do it, this was the right move politically to do it all at once, one swell swoop, huh?
Right. And it's one fell swoop, and you're avoiding, I would contrast it to what we see on trade and tariffs right now, where there's sort of been the warning and somewhat of the will he, won't he. Look, it's a stretch from January 6th to economic policy, but it's a window into decision making. And are you going to have a moment where does some foreign leader say something? Is there some issue? And we go on and we have to find out that, it wasn't a thought out policy or review on tariffs like they say it's going to be, but instead you go on and you log on, you get a truth tirade on a tariff
Okay,
tantrum.
fascinating. What do you think? You're kind of setting us up like that's probably what's going to happen. You're going to get the more this though, Dan. It may we may be making it sound a little more knee jerk, and that it was the president who made this decision just to push it through. Politically, you're saying maybe that was the right thing.
Politically, I'm saying it's the right thing. I think from the process, let's review and think through when you're hearing Treasury Secretary Bessent or Secretary Rubio or others say things that there's going to be a process, there's going to be a review. Keep in the mind of your back of your head, the president may decide that's too difficult, that's going to take too long, and he's just going to go the way he wants to.
And do you think he'll do that when we get to the tariffs? I guess that's a much different kind of a damn the torpedoes approach. There are many more.
Right, but I'm arguing that to be aware, and I think that will happen with if you have a issue with Mexico or you have an insult from a European leader or something is seen as not going in his way in some of these early negotiations, be it with China, Canada, etc. How quickly will he be willing to set aside any notions of a process or procedure or what his advisors have told you in advance to just go the way he wants to go and what he feels is right? In the instance of these pardons and executive orders, it's worked politically. Politically, that is, I'm setting aside what you and many can agree is the damage to the republic or the legal institutions and process. But be aware that this will happen on trade. This will happen on foreign policy. This will happen on national security too.
What did it mean that he had all of those CEOs there, Dan?
I think it goes back to that imagery of people bending the knee, the elements of society coming to be there, to be present for his political, inauguration is the term. But there were elements of it that felt like a coronation in senses.
There were a lot of elements that felt like a coronation. Dan, as we look forward here, and we're going to go here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to sign off and move on to Tyler Mathisen from longtime anchor from CNBC. He was news director at CNBC. We're going to find out how the media is approaching this and the pressure that they're under, what they're thinking. But Dan, how long does this Trump 50% plus approval rating honeymoon last? And where will be his major roadblocks coming up? And will there be any? Can he continue to steamroll through and get a continuing resolution passed? Can he continue to get how long do we see the Trump agenda continue to prevail?
Yeah, I think you're in this honeymoon period. He's able to do things with without a lot of opposition. He's able to move on his agenda. Look, you said it out there. Congress is going to be like molasses if you're trying to get all of these different priorities into one bill. You're also going to have, the dynamics in the Republican Party. I'll borrow one of my favorite Boris Johnson phrases of wasps in a jam jar is what some of these elements are going to be like as they're arguing for what they want if it's going to be one big package. So there's the legislative reality. Two, how do you deal with crises that come in over the transom when you're staffing up your administration and arguably trying to move along with this? What if we see disruptions to the poultry industry in the U.S. with the bird flu spreading? What are other crises overseas that could happen? How does he respond to those? And how does the public see both a world, those things tie together, a world that is unstable, as well as the prices they want to see go down, energy, groceries, housing. He's no longer able to critique those problems. He now owns them.
Dan Mahaffee, the president and CEO of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, our senior political analyst on the FarrCast. Can't wait to hear more from you next week, Dan. This is fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming right back with my great friend, Tyler Mathisen, when we come back on the FarrCast.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. We appreciate you listening into the FarrCast this week. And now to introduce this week's special guest, here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. Terrific segments today. Great segment with Lebenthal to start out. Mahaffee. Oh, man, is he fired up today, folks. Fired up today. And I bet when we get him back next week, he'll still be fired up. Mahaffee was full charge. Now, great treat. A really great treat. My friend Tyler Mathisen from CNBC, for many years, the managing editor at CNBC, a longtime anchor. And you just got the idea that it was not only the best shows, but whenever a show got in trouble, in comes Mathisen. They move him right over. You could see him predictably. In fact, you'd start to say, geez, I think this show is kind of starting to lose it. And boom, next thing you know, there's Mathisen and the ratings go back up. So really the miracle worker, the Annie Sullivan of CNBC. Tyler Mathisen, welcome to the FarrCast.
Michael, it's great to see you and to be on the other side of the screen from you. And today to do a little sort of asking questions, but a lot more having questions asked of me, which is a different and unusual posture for me, let us say.
Ladies and gentlemen, what I've found over the years, when you get somebody like Tyler Mathisen, who has interviewed thousands and thousands of money managers and CEOs and politicians and every other leadership position in our country and around the world, they've got a really clear understanding and expertise that they don't get to share. They don't get to share. It's their job to sit and ask questions. So we're going to start right now. Tyler Mathisen, what do you think of the U.S. economy, and what do you think about where markets are right now from your seat?
Well, my sense is that the economy is quite strong. I mean, you've got very good wage growth, which I think is a good sign of sort of the attitude of American businesses and business leaders that they're going to be able to pay those kinds of wages to workers. I think inflation is manageable at 3% or under. I think corporate profit growth is off to a good start based on what we saw from the fourth quarter. That's looking backwards, but the forecasts for this year are high, maybe a little ambitious. But if you get high single digit, low double digit corporate profit growth, that tells you that the economy is functioning pretty well. And you've now got an extraordinarily business-friendly president and administration in office, and they're going to do a couple of things, seemingly. One is they're going to at least try to memorialize for the next few years the tax cuts that were done in 2017 and took effect thereafter. That's number one. Number two, they're going to cut regulations dramatically. And I think that's going to help both business margins and the attitude of the business climate generally. So I think you've got a couple of things coming together at the same time. You've got a pre-existing economy that was running pretty well and is going to continue, it would seem, to run pretty well. And you have a business-friendly administration coming in. The one hesitance I have would be surrounding tariffs and what they might mean, both for economic activity globally and in the United States, and for prices. I think that's the question. How big, how high do tariffs go? How widespread will they be applied? And what will their effects be?
It's clear that many of the folks upon whom President Trump wants to place these tariffs have been operating with an advantage. We're operating with a margin that is much larger than our margin in many situations. We're spending much more money on NATO and the World Health Organization, and you pick whatever it is. The U.S. is providing a lot more support proportionally and in a percentage basis than a lot of other countries. But when you go back and try and tell anybody they've got to pay more for anything, you're going to get pushback. So this isn't going to be easy. It's going to require a bit of a dogfight, and these fights can get messy. So it's the fallout as we go through the process. Doesn't mean it's not worth going through the process, of course. To me, many of these are worth going through the process. I would try to do it delicately, and I'm not sure the word delicate is in President Trump's lexicon, either by design or desire. Cares about it.
I think you're right about that. I mean, a subtlety is not the word that comes to mind. I think what's interesting with particular reference to the tariffs is that historically, globally, and in the case of the United States, tariffs have been used for trade reasons principally. If one country put a tariff on our goods, we put a tariff on their goods. In this administration, I think tariffs are going to be used for that, for sure, but also as a transactional piece of leverage to get foreign countries, whether they are our allies, our neighbors, or our adversaries, to do the kinds of things that the administration wants those countries to do, whether it is to pay more into NATO for defense, whether it is to allow more American products at a lower price into their country. It can be an economic piece of leverage, or it can be a geopolitical piece of leverage. So I think the use of the tariff to try and stop immigration, whether the tariffs are used to somehow clamp down on the production of fentanyl or its precursors, it's going to be the tactical use of tariffs that is going to be qualitatively different, I think, in this administration than has been the case historically.
Tyler, you've seen these cycles countless times. Well, I don't want to say quite countless, but new presidents coming into office, the expectations for the first year of a cycle. We go through this at the beginning of every year, where we have the January effect, where we talk about what's going to happen over the next 12 months, as if suddenly one curtain's gone down and one curtain's gone up in the 24-hour period ending December 31st and beginning January 1st, that somehow everything's going to be new and different. It's certainly a continuation. What do you make of where we are now versus the hype and expectations? What does your long-term perspective offer to our listeners to say, how excited do we get about the new president, and how excited and worried should we be on a early January perspective?
Well, I think back to Warren Buffett and what has served him so well, and that is to, in the long run, bet on America. I think in the long run, the United States is going to be the global leader, both economically and in terms of military might, in all likelihood, though China is pouring a tremendous amount of resources into their military, building their navy, building their arsenal for what may be an effort to reclaim Taiwan as their own, which is a separate issue that could really derail a tremendous amount of positive impetus in the global economy right now. But in the long run, I think the United States is going to do fine. I'm no better than you, and I've learned from you, Michael, that the ability to predict the market in any given year or the economy in any given year is probably a fool's errand, and that what you have to do is invest for the long haul, which is a matter in most cases of decades. And over decades, I think the U.S. economy will do very well. I think the excitement of the new administration, and as I mentioned a moment ago, the two principal directional things that Mr. Trump wants to do, which is memorialize his tax cuts from the previous administration and maybe make deeper tax cuts, and two, to deregulate, degum the system, as it were, can only be read positively in an economy that is already functioning quite well. So my guess is that 2025 is going to be a good to better than average year. I'm not sure about whether stocks. I'll tell you what my guess is that the probability that we have another 25% year in the S&P 500 is low, based on where valuations are today. I mean, I think the best guide historically to how stocks are going to do is the valuation at which they start whatever measuring period you're looking at. And right now, the valuations are a little bit stretched across the broad market, largely because the tech valuations are so high. There are obviously areas like healthcare, like energy, like industrials, and to a degree financials that aren't as overvalued.
Tyler, before we finish up here, the role of media. The role of media when you started your career, hell, when I started doing media 25 or more years ago and 20 years ago as a CNBC contributor, we sort of had to stay in our lanes. The role of media was to report. We were still, I feel, you in particular, you might be one of the guys who followed best the example of Walter Cronkite. I think of that type of journalist is I'm here to report. I'm not here to weigh in. I'm not here to opine. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to tell you about the news. That's changed, hasn't it? Can you describe, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, tell me, but I see that change. And what's the current role of the current on-air anchor?
Well, I think you're right, and I think it's evident that media have evolved to be far more than merely the reporters and tellers of fact. There's an intermediate step between that role, which is the fact gatherer and the fact teller, as you perceive the facts. Listen, you and I, Michael, could walk out on the street and see the exact same thing happening, and you might see it one way, and I might see it a different way. So there are intermediate steps. There's the fact gatherer and the fact teller. Then there's what goes under the banner of news analysis. News analysis, which you'll see, and it'll be labeled as such on the front page of the New York Times. And then there's pure opinion journalism, which is point of view journalism, where the teller's point of view, whether it is a political point of view, a moral point of view, a societal or cultural point of view, where that comes in to the story that journalist is telling. And there are still media personalities and media enterprises that run the gamut from those fact gatherers and fact tellers to the news analyzers to the point of view or opinion journalists. But I would say that today, compared to when I began, now really 42 years ago, working for Time Incorporated and Money Magazine, which was now a no longer a magazine, it doesn't really exist anymore. The center of gravity of journalism has moved toward the analysis and point of view side of the ledger and away from the straight fact gatherer and fact teller. And so, and in my case, I always try to put myself in the shoes of the viewer listener and ask the question that comes from curiosity more than it comes from point of view. In fact, I try and take point of view out of it. I try and interpose my own innate curiosity for that of the viewer. How can I serve the viewer best here? And I kind of know what I don't know. And one of the joys of my job is I get to speak to intelligent people like you who are actually practitioners of, in your case, the art of money management. Note I didn't say the science of it. And I want to elicit from the sources who are on air with me their best thinking. It's not what I care about, because I know what I don't know, and I don't know a lot more than I do know. So I guess I'm flattered that you would mention me in the same sentence as Walter Cronkite, for goodness sakes. But whatever, I always try to lean towards that role that says I'm going to put myself in the viewer's shoes. I want to ask the curious question that comes from my curiosity and hopefully mirrors or reflects the curiosity of the viewer, whoever the guest happens to be.
Anyone who just listened to what you just said about the role of media and the role of the journalist will now understand why I made the comparison to Cronkite. That was it. It is close to what he would have said, and just the nicest, kindest man you'd ever want to hang out with, and he was pretty funny too.
The more I hang out with you, Michael, the more I know how many friends you have, and it well deserved. I didn't know about Walter Cronkite.
That's
the kind of guy you are. You collect friends like I might collect seashells on the beach, but
I like people, I really do. And Tyler, when I go on air, I always think about the average investor who might be listening closely to whatever it is I say. And I really try to be measured in my words about whether you should buy or whether you should sell or whether you should do anything other than stay invested for the long term. If you know that we have listeners out there saying, geez, we've got this guy, Tyler Mathisen. What do you think they should be listening to when they watch financial television, when they watch the media? How do they discern the wheat from the chaff? How do they get to the meat of the issue? And so many folks, when I talk to them in just out on the street or going to give talks and meet the public, they'll say, what news do you listen to, Mr. Farr, that isn't biased? How do you get your facts? What would you tell them? How should they listen and read?
That's a very interesting question. I think there is so much content. That's the phrase of the day, that
overwhelming, isn't it?
Out there, and so many places that you can pull in content, and it's maybe 20 years ago, CNBC had a bit of a not a monopoly position, but certainly a much stronger position as a distributor of financial news and content than it does today. Not because CNBC has done anything particularly differently or wrong, but simply because the way people consume media today is so different. They get it on their phones, they get it on TikTok, so long as TikTok's around. They get it on Instagram, they get it on X, they get it on Yahoo, they get it in multiple places. I think what I would say is that the more you read and the more you listen, the better, because the more information that you absorb and can process, theoretically, smarter you become. And I believe that the viewing public, the American public generally, is pretty wise, and they can see who's making sense and who isn't, and they can probably pick up the clues pretty readily over who's trying to sell them something and who's trying to educate them, who's really trying to inform them so that they can make better choices. I would never, ever, ever, even with my dear friend Michael, I would never, ever simply take the name, and you don't do this very often, frankly, the name of an individual security and say, well, so-and-so said I should buy this. He likes it, so I'm going to go do that. When you read something about a stock or a security, that is a point of entry. That is not a point of conclusion. That's where you start to do your research. And the fact that insert name here says they like this stock at this particular price, or they like Bitcoin at this particular price, is a point of entry. It's not where you make the final decision. It's where you begin the study so that you yourself can make an intelligent decision for you, not for.
Tyler, thank you for being with us on the FarrCast.
Great to see you, Michael.
That's it for another FarrCast, ladies and gentlemen, as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world, bringing you insiders so that we can better understand the world around us as we get barraged by data and information and news headlines and outlets. How do we get through our weeks and our days in an intelligent, disciplined, dispassionate way and make good investment decisions and remain optimistic about our great country and our great future? That's what we're here for, and we'll be back again next week doing it all again. For Harry Jennings, our producer, everybody at Hightower Advisors, Farr Miller in Washington, I'm so grateful on my way back to Washington, D.C. today. Hope I see you there. I'm Michael Farr. See you next week.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the FarrCast. Thanks to our guest, Jim Lebenthal, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Tyler Mathisen. And thanks to you, all of our listeners, for your support over the past 8 years and carrying us on into 2025. Please share us with friends and colleagues as we continue to grow our audience. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it is not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And if we can be of help, please reach out to me at hjennings@farmiller.com. And I'll be happy to put you in touch with one of our investment professionals to help you navigate your financial course. We are grateful for all of your notes and comments, and we try to respond to as many as we can. Please keep those emails and messages coming. Take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. We'll be back with you next week on the FarrCast. Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr, Miller & Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, and a SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.